Hiya, so this is the 12.3 Energy by Aaron Sparrowhawk. So, firstly, what actually is energy? And it's technically the strengthened vitality required for a sustained physical or mental activity. And just to get some general ideas here, for every 1,000 calories is essentially one kilocalorie, and 1,000 joules is essentially 1 kilojoule. Just should like have 1,000 milliliters is a liter, for example. These are sort of units that we're going to be dealing with. And just to get some measurements on the energy, 1 gram of carbohydrate supplies 4 kilocalories. 1 gram of fat provides 9 kilocalories, and 1 gram of protein provides 4 kilocalories. The carbohydrates, 1 gram supplies 17 kilojoules, 1 gram of fat provides 38 kilojoules, and 1 gram of protein supplies 17 kilojoules. So we're just going to go through briefly. Fats are the main store of they're our main energy supply. They also create energy, and for ATP they're very important for cell functions as well. Carbohydrates also give structure and support as well as energy, and they're most commonly found in starch and grains. And the main function of protein is growth and repair of muscle tissue. So moving on from this, we're going to be talking a couple of measures on ways to evaluate looking at somebody's body and determining whether they're healthy or unhealthy. So firstly, you have biometric analysis. This method measures body composition by sending a low, safe electrical current through the body. This passes freely through the fluids contained in the muscle tissues, but encounters difficulty and resistance when passing through the fat tissue. The resistance of the fat tissue is termed as bioelectrical impedance, and is accurately measured by body fat scales. So when set against a person's height, gender, or weight, the scales can compute their body into a fat percentage. So advantages: the body composition analysis is very simple and is quick to perform, and with the right equipment it can actually be done at home. But the disadvantage is it's very expensive to use, and the buying one will actually cost you money, and they're quite hard to find in places, and they can range from £100 to £1,000. So another way to measure somebody's body fat percentage or body composition is by the skin fold measurement test. And the skin fold measure, you have from 3 to 9 standard sites around the body where you'd collect the measurement with the skin fold calipers. And obviously the test pinches the skin at an appropriate site, and the calipers are then applied 1 centimetre below and at right angles to pinch, and a reading will give you in millimetres, taken 2 seconds later. The mean of 2 measurements should be taken. If 2 measurements differ greater, then a third should be done, and then you'd get a median out of all of those. So it's pretty basic. Advantages of the skin fold is it's widely utilised, and you have access throughout, and the skin calipers don't actually cost that much. Disadvantage is if you don't know where you're actually taking the measurements on somebody's body, it can be totally wrong and inaccurate and unreliable. And finally, the last one is the hydrodensometry. The dry weight of a subject is first determined. Subject in minimal clothing then sits into a specialised seat of some sort, expelled over the air. All air from the lungs have been taken out, so they've just breathed out, and they're now lowered into a tank until all body parts are submerged. The person must remain motionless underwater while the underwater weight is recorded. This procedure is repeated several times to get a dependable underwater weight measure. So advantages of this: underwater weighing is the most widely used in high-level elite athlete sports, so you can definitely see that these are very true, reliable, rich results that can be relied on. But the disadvantage is the equipment. Again, it's really expensive to get a hand on, and only certain facilities will actually do it. and tanks are mostly located at a university or other research institutes and generally not accessible for a general population. So, direct and indirect. These are more sort of ways how you can work out how hard you're working in terms of your body. So, one way to do it, the direct way, is having an athlete working in an airtight chamber or human calometer, and then coils in the ceiling containing water circulating at a specific temperature. So, and obviously the athlete has a mouthpiece to breathe, and the harder they're working, the water will actually begin to flow. And obviously then they get a reading of the measure of water, and then they can do mathematical results to work out how hard you've actually been working, depending on how much water there is. So, the pros of this is it does give accurate results. The maths prove it, and the results will be dependable on. And it's also easy enough for a participant to understand. That's a pro that's really underrated. If a participant understands it, then it's going to be simple for them to do, and they're not going to feel pressured or uneasy around the test. Cons are it's very expensive. As we said before, you can't get access anywhere else, which then leads to you having to travel, and most places don't actually allow this to happen. Indirect estimates heat production by measuring respiratory gases, often via the Douglas bag collection and gas analysis system. So energy consumption is calculated from an amount of oxygen consumed, and the way they do that is 1 litre of oxygen is the same as 4.8 kilocalories expended. So the pros of this, it's easy to understand again for the participant. They simply do their exercise, and obviously the maths is worked out for them. And it's slightly more accessible than the direct way. However, the problem is it's very time consuming for the people who are actually doing the maths, and it can cost money. It will cost no matter where you are going or who you're doing it with. So this slide is going to be a little bit more detailed, so this is going to take a little bit longer. So, BMR, METs, this is the sort of slide that we're going to go through, and we're going to go into detail about all of these, as well as energy expenditure, intake and output. So what is BMR? Essentially, BMR is the minimum amount of nutrients needed to stay alive, including 8 hours of sleep and 12 hours of fasting. So BMR is defined, that's what we're kind of talking about, but BMR is actually defined as amount of energy required to sustain your body's vital functioning systems in a waking state. Without doing anything, an adult will use roughly around 1.1 kilocalories every minute. However, BMR has 4 factors that will affect it. Firstly, it's age. During adolescence, you'll need much higher intake of calories as your muscles are still developing, as well as your bones and other physiological adaptations, which will mean using more energy to perform a task. Physical activity, the harder the activity that you're doing, and the longer the duration of it, the activity will use up more energy, and your body will need more energy to function properly. Third is climate. When you're in a hot climate, you'll be sweating a lot more, meaning you'll use up more energy, and if you were to be in a colder environment, you'd obviously be shivering, so that would lead you to using up energy to actually move the body when shivering. So either climate, in sort of the scale, if it's too cold, you're still going to be using more energy than normal, and if it's hotter than normal, you're still going to be using more energy than you normally would. So climate has a big impact on how much energy we actually use. And finally, out of the 4 is gender. Men tend to have larger muscles and larger muscle mass, so they will require a larger amount of energy due to the muscles being larger and needing more energy to function properly. So, how to calculate BMR? BMR is quite a hard sort of thing to work out if you don't really have all of the equations in front of you, but it's pretty much for my age, an under 18-year-old, it would be 17.686 times your weight in kgs plus 658.2. So, I'm a 17-year-old. So, what I've done here is 17.686 times my weight in kilograms, and then add 658.2, and my personal BMR is 1,896.22. That is my personal BMR. Everybody else's will be completely different depending on how old they are and what they weigh. So BMR is different depending on anybody ever. Every person will have a different BMR no matter what. So METs. METs are similar to BMR, however METs include what you have in one day. So they'll also include standing, walking, eating, other activities. They'll include that. It's more personal. And it's very accurate. It allows you to be more strict. So obviously you can do what you've actually done in a daily routine simply by adding in all of your METs. So for me, obviously I'm standing for about 45-50 minutes per day. Just standing. I'm walking. I do a lot of walking. I do about an hour's walking. So that will be another MET to add on. On a general day, I usually walk down the stairs 4 or 5 times a day. So you'd add that on. And eventually, obviously, we have lots of calculations here, but what you have a sheet, and it's the activity has a certain number for the METs. So it will be the certain number times 3.5 times your weight in kgs, divide by 200, and then times the duration of how long your activity is. So my total for an average day of METs is 1212.63. Now, to work out your whole day, work out your whole calorific for a day, add METs to your BMR. Your personal METs to your personal BMR. So obviously mine would be 1212.63. Add 1,896, and that gets me 3,108.63. That is my personal calorific for a day. Just one day. And obviously everybody else is going to be different because everybody's doing something different every day. So it all depends on the person. So finally, energy intake and output. I've put a picture of the scales here because the scales are a really easy metaphor to use for this. So let's say we consume 3,000 calories a day. Somebody consumes that. And we did enough exercise to actually burn those 3,000 calories off. That's perfect. We stay the same weight. We stay level. Intake matches our output. However, if we consume 3,000 calories, but don't actually burn those 3,000 off, let's say we burn 2,000 off, even though we've still burnt 2,000, that's not balanced. That's not equal. So we're actually going to be gaining weight. So the scales are actually going to tip one way, aren't they? However, looking at it the other way, on the other hand, if we consume 2,000 calories, for example, but we actually burn 3,000, that puts us the other way. We're actually losing weight. And if you do that a certain number of times, your body's actually going to take a toll, and it's actually going to affect how your body functions during a day. So just as a brief summary of what we've actually looked at, we've looked at the METs, your personal METs, your personal BMR, how they're calculated and how you work all of them out to become a calorific for a day. We've looked at indirect and direct ways to measure heat production and how much our body's actually working and how hard it's working. And we've actually also gone through the ways on how a subject's body composition can be done through hydrogen skin fold analysis, and biometric analysis. And finally, we've also just defined and gone really simple with what energy is, the measurements for it, and also RDA for fats and carbohydrates and proteins per day. And just to go back to that, for a sedentary person, you would need 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. That's for your protein. You'd need 70 to 300 grams per day for a sedentary person. And for a female, that's for male. So for female, you'd need 250 to 340 for a female, and you'd need 260 to 390 for a male. And for your fat, you'd need 45 to 80 for a male, and you would need 40 and 75 for a female. That's per day for a sedentary person. So sedentary is literally no activity, just a relaxed, almost a simple phrase to use this, as a lot of people say, is a couch potato sort of thing. Somebody that isn't actually doing anything, is just sitting and not using any sort of physical activity, and doing as minimal as possible. And so those are all of your RDAs for fat, carbohydrates and protein. And that's pretty much the whole sort of energy unit wrapped up.